Forest, it felt like. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about the story and what we were seeing there.
Well, Ori and the Blind Forest actually starts with Ori's birth, right? Like I always like stories that have this great, like beginnings, middles, and actual ends, right? And you see this entire character arc. We don't want to give too much away in terms of like the story yet, but Ori is being raised by Naru and loses her relatively early in the story, but then has to go out and but then has to go out and kind of like find out more about himself and about the forest that he lives in.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's go and look at some gameplay. So this is brand new, never seen before gameplay.
This is one of my favorite sections in the game. It's the Chinzo tree, where we're also showing one of the abilities that are really, really cool in the game. Gennady just learned the bash ability, and the bash ability, as you see, allows you to propel yourself from basically anything in the game. Like here, you will propel himself from an enemy in the game, but then you also can bash yourself from anything pretty much. Like up there's a challenge where you actually have to bash yourself off of projectiles, right? Okay. And then in order to make things a little bit more complicated, you can also redirect projectiles, and you see he is actually going through these kind of like gameplay challenges by completely using the bash mechanic. And that's what we kind of were looking for. When we actually started developing the game, we just made videos of hey, what hasn't been done yet in a 2D platformer before, right? Mm-hmm. And we just had a video where we saw Ori kind of like kicking off from enemy to enemy and so on, and that's what the bash was inspired by.
Brilliant. And shout outs to Gennady, by the way, who's playing for us. Thank you, mate, doing a great job. So, you mentioned there about things that you've never seen before in platform games and working on them. There's clearly a lot of platform game inspiration going into Ori. Like, what kind of games have you looked at, and what were your inspirations?
Well, a lot of these 8 and 16-bit games are really what we were inspired by, right? We grew up with them, and it was so cool, being at school the next day and talking about them. Obviously, kind of like the Marios and so on, that kind of stuff. And we feel like that's these kind of games, like that's a little bit missing right now in the industry. So we wanted to come out with a game that really gives you that sort of feeling again. So I hope that people get that.
That's a tricky balance to get, right? To get that old school, that pixel perfect platform action feel, but then do something new and change it up a little bit. So that's a big challenge.
Right. But that's exactly what we wanted. We wanted people to really feel again that that this absolute pixel precision, and then also introduce a lot of variety, right? Like I love these games from Nintendo back then, where they put in ideas that other developers would have made 5 games with. And it's just really cool to kind of like look at the entire game now and see, oh my god, this is a big game and we have so much variety in it. It's great.
So tell us about the enemies that we're seeing in this level. So where have these enemies come from?
So this here is more of a kind of like a challenge area. So in terms of like the pacing of the game, we're always kind of like switching up between platforming and more puzzly bits, and then also enemy gameplay and so on. So we always want to make sure that the player always stays entertained, right? That it's not like, oh, this is repeating itself or anything like that in there.
Okay. So what other abilities is Ori going to learn as you play through the game?
There's a ton of abilities. We just basically, as we said, like we made videos at the start where we just wanted to see what hasn't been done yet in a 2D platformer. We don't want to give too much away. We want to stay focused on the bash ability because it's really, really great right now.
Oh, come on, Thomas. Tell us some more. Come on. I know you're fun.
You will see more in the upcoming weeks.
Absolutely. I actually want to talk to you about your team at Moon Studios. I find it fascinating that this is being developed kind of remotely, right? Your team is spread all over the world.
Yeah. So, I've been working in the industry for some time now, and I've always kind of like seen this issue of, oh, we have this really great person and we want to hire him, but then you can't get the person because he's in a different country or anything like that, right? When I approached Microsoft regarding Moon Studios, I told them, look, I know all these great people, but they're scattered all around the world. And they were okay with it, right? And now Moon is basically a studio where we have people in Austria, in Germany, in Israel, in the States, in Australia, in the Netherlands, in Denmark, in everywhere. We just try to really find the right people for the job.
And it seems to be coming together amazing. Me and my wife find it hard to make beans on toast when we're in the same room. So creating this when you're working remotely is ridiculous. And so talk to me about the art style as well, because the game looks absolutely beautiful, and it looks different to what we've seen before. There's a real kind of painterly aspect to this. Is that something you've been aiming for?
we like initially the art style we had two major goals, right? We wanted it to obviously like look beautiful, but then at the same time we also wanted to make sure that it's absolutely 100% clear. Like I like the Nintendo clearness, you know, when it comes to kind of like Mario, like knowing exactly which pixel you're actually going to land on and so on, right? Yeah. So to me, like I worked as an artist in the industry, to me for like 10 years or so, right? For me it was always clear that, hey, we would make something beautiful, right? But I think the thing that we're really proud of is that it's also always completely crystal clear what you actually have to do, where you're actually going to land, just this precision that, you know, that used to be the norm, the status quo, to bring that back, that was super, super important for us.
Talk to us about what we just saw there. I mean, that looked like a kind of mid-level boss battle. Are you bringing boss battles to Ori?
There are challenges like that. I mean, in terms of like boss battles,
look at this. This looks incredible.
Yeah. In terms of boss battles, we wanted to stray away from the kind of like from the traditional setup of, hey, here's a boss, here's some character that we're introducing, and shoot him 3 times in the eye, right, and then he's dead. And you're gonna see a moment here, and we've seen it kind of like at the Gamescom stage where we have moments that are completely frantic, that are completely crazy, where you have to use the abilities that you just learned in order to actually advance through the game, right? And we're doing this in multiple ways, a couple of times throughout the game, and yeah, we think that this works way, way better than the old kind of like, you know, tried kind of like trope of like, oh yeah, here's some character that you have to defeat.
Yeah, totally. It's big, so I need to look for the weak spot. One of the things I found interesting, I guess, one of the arts of making a good platform game must be choosing your save points carefully. And you've got around that in a really interesting way, right?
We came up with something very, very interesting, which is the Soul Link, right? Like, we initially, when we started developing it, we just kind of like had these checkpoints set throughout the game. But then we thought, hey, it would be much, much more interesting if we actually tie this to the resource system, right? To the energy crystals and so on. So you can actually, in Ori, save any time that you want, but it's going to cost you resources, right? So now, as a player, you have to face the challenge of, well, do I use my energy for the attacks that I have, for the abilities that I have, or do I actually use it for the Soul Link? And the Soul Link is also where you can actually progress, upgrade, that kind of stuff.
Now the E3 trailer, you know, looked quite serene. I mean, it got a bit dark towards the end, but we're talking about a real challenge with this game, right? You're really ratcheting up the difficulty as you go through the game.
It's not a completely like easy game, right? Like it's a gamer's game. We are inspired by these games of the 90s, right? Where games were actually a real challenge, right? So there's a lot of areas in the game where it's like, hey, this is actually a real challenge, right? It's not going to be something that you just, you know, cruise through, but it's so satisfying if you go through these kind of games and you actually beat something. Like you walk into a room and you're like, oh my god, I'll never beat that, right? And then you try it and then, oh wow, I did that, I'm awesome. That's one of the best moments that you can have in gaming. So
one of the other great things about those gamer games, particularly platformers, was the secrets and the Easter eggs, you know, whether they were intended or not. Are you putting those things into Ori?
Like, there are areas in the game where it's like, where we kind of assume that, yeah, maybe 5% of the people out there will find that, but I just love that. Yeah, you know, like we grew up playing games like Super Mario Bros. 3, where, you know, like you found the flutes and you felt like, oh my god, right? Yeah. So yeah, there's this kind of stuff. We're super, you know, like we love that. So
and in those days, you didn't have the internet to tell you where those things were,
exactly.
Right?
Well, that's why we have to hide it even better.
That's right. I mean, I know this is a terrible question, but how big is the game? I mean, how big are these levels and these worlds that we're looking at?
I mean, the world is pretty huge. In recent playtests, we saw people playing around 10 hours. So it's actually, I mean, it grew quite, you know, by quite a lot. And we need that for that kind of experience that we wanted to create. We really need to feel like there's an open world. There's this world that you can explore that has tons of variety. So yeah, it became a really, really big game now.
And it looks like it would be actually a great game for speedruns. Has that been on your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can't wait to see people actually playing through it and hopefully speedrunning through it. And we even want to do something crazy where hopefully we can do something where, hey, the first person who plays through the game without ever dying once gets a spot in the credits or something like that, because I would love to see that. Yeah, that would be great.
Thomas, last question very quickly. Is Naru okay?
You'll have to wait and see when the game ships.
I don't think I could do it. All right, Thomas, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Everyone, we're going to hand back to Larry now for even more live gameplay. It's Sunset Overdrive.
Thank you, Thomas, and thank you, Graham. Ori cannot wait for that. All right, next up, I'm going to have Ted Price from Insomniac Games is going to be with me in just a minute to talk about Sunset Overdrive. But first, let's take a look at this.